Welcome back to PsyberSpace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, and today we're diving into a topic that's both fascinating and, at times, a bit controversial. We're exploring the psychological triggers behind the phenomenon in which people misinterpret challenges to their closely held ideas as personal attacks. It's a behavior pattern you might recognize in the so-called Karen incidents that so often go viral online. The term Karen has become a popular cultural shorthand, but behind the memes and social media clips, there's a real psychological dynamic at play. It's about more than just unreasonable demands or entitlement. At the heart, it often involves a cognitive process where discomfort or cognitive dissonance leads to defensive behavior. Today, we're unpacking this with insights from psychology, real-world examples, and research. Cognitive dissonance, a term coined by psychologist Leon Festinger in the 1950s, describes the mental discomfort experienced when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, or is confronted with new information that conflicts with existing beliefs, ideals, or values. This theory is crucial for understanding why some people react negatively when their views are challenged. Consider this scenario. Someone believes they are exceptionally fair, and yet they are confronted with evidence of their own biased behavior. The conflict between their self-perception and the evidence can cause significant psychological discomfort. For some, the easiest way to alleviate this discomfort isn't to change the belief or behavior, but to deny the evidence. This discomfort increases with the significance of the beliefs to one's identity. For example, if a belief is closely tied to a person's sense of self or moral values, the discomfort and the subsequent reaction can be more intense and defensive. To delve even deeper, cognitive dissonance isn't just about conflicting beliefs. It's about how we strive for internal consistency. When we experience dissonance, it's as if our mind is trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit. The discomfort drives us to either change our beliefs, justify our beliefs, or ignore new information altogether. This is a fundamental aspect of human psychology because maintaining a stable, coherent sense of self is essential for our mental well-being. Furthermore, the intensity of dissonance can vary based on how central the belief is to our identity. For instance, if you strongly identify as an environmentally conscious person, but you're confronted with your own wasteful habits, the dissonance can feel overwhelming. This might lead to significant behavioral changes, such as adopting more sustainable practices, or it could trigger rationalizations to minimize the dissonance, like downplaying the impact of your actions on the environment. Each response is a way of coping with the psychological tension created by the dissonance. It's also worth noting how societal and cultural expectations can amplify cognitive dissonance. For instance, when societal norms dictate certain behaviors or beliefs, individuals who find themselves out of alignment may experience heightened dissonance. This can be particularly intense in environments with rigid norms, such as corporate settings or tight-knit communities, where deviation from the norm is not only noticed but often sanctioned. Acknowledging these external pressures helps us understand why people might fiercely defend their existing beliefs to maintain their social standing or their self-esteem. Confirmation bias plays a big role here as well. It's our tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports our prior beliefs or values. Psychologist Peter Wasson argued that confirmation bias is likely a result of our adapted preference for consistency in our beliefs and attitudes. When someone points out inconsistencies, it doesn't just challenge our belief, it feels like a personal attack. This bias can be seen in how individuals consume media. People tend to favor news sources or social media feeds that reflect their own views, which reinforces their existing beliefs and shields them from cognitive dissonance. This creates echo chambers that amplify confirmation bias and can exacerbate defensive reactions when confronted with opposing views. Another critical aspect of confirmation bias is how it impacts our openness to new ideas. When entrenched in our own viewpoints, bolstered by selective information that supports our pre-existing beliefs, we become less receptive to alternative perspectives. This can significantly stifle personal and collective growth. In a society that values innovation and diverse ideas, the ability to question our own assumptions and to consider other viewpoints is crucial. Yet, confirmation bias often acts as a barrier, making it challenging to break free from the comfort of familiar thoughts and engage genuinely with innovative or contradictory information. Even more, confirmation bias doesn't just influence individuals, it permeates entire cultures and institutions, shaping public opinion and even policy decisions. Media outlets, often catering to specific ideological demographics, can reinforce this bias by presenting news and commentary that aligns with the preferences of their audience, further entrenching divided perspectives. This cycle of selective exposure leads to a more polarized society, where common ground is hard to find. Recognizing and actively working against confirmation bias is therefore not only a personal responsibility, but a societal imperative to foster a more informed and cohesive community. One interesting facet of confirmation bias is its role in the reinforcement of stereotypes and prejudices. When individuals unconsciously select information that supports their prejudiced views, they strengthen these biases, which can perpetuate discrimination and social injustice. Educating ourselves and others about the mechanisms of confirmation bias, particularly in how we consume media, can lead to more conscious information consumption and a reduction in prejudiced behaviors. This educational approach is vital in diverse societies striving for equity and inclusion. Social psychologist Henri Taffel's social identity theory helps us understand how our group affiliations affect our self-image. When our group's ideals are challenged, it can feel like a personal threat because it threatens our social identity. This is particularly evident in highly polarized environments like politics or online communities, where attacks on group beliefs are often perceived as attacks on personal identity. This theory explains that our self-esteem is partially derived from the status of the groups to which we belong. When a group is criticized or its status is threatened, our personal self-esteem can feel directly attacked, prompting a defensive stance. Expanding further on social identity theory, it's important to explore how this theory applies not just in confrontations, but in everyday interactions and self-perception. Individuals derive a significant part of their self-esteem from the groups to which they belong, as we just mentioned, whether these groups are based on race, nationality, profession, or any other significant identifier. This linkage means that any perceived threat to the group can feel like a direct threat to the individual. When these norms or values are challenged, it's not just a theoretical disagreement, it's a personal battle for identity preservation. This dynamic can escalate conflicts, turning what could be constructive dialogue into a defensive standoff. Social identity theory also helps explain the phenomena of in-group favoritism and out-group derogation. People tend to view members of their own group more favorably, attributing positive traits to them more freely, while they often judge those from different groups more harshly or with suspicion. This bias can exacerbate social divisions, particularly in diverse societies. It underscores the need for approaches in education, media, and public policy that promote understanding and cooperation across group boundaries. By fostering environments that encourage intergroup dialogue and empathy, we can mitigate some of the automatic defensive responses triggered by social identity threats. Keep in mind that this is a slightly different technique than the media's tendency to attribute equal validity to both sides of an argument. What we're talking about here is being open to new facts and new information from different sources. Social identity theory's implications extend to online interactions, where anonymity can sometimes lead to more extreme expressions of group identity. In digital environments, individuals might display heightened loyalty to their group or more aggressive defense against perceived outsiders. This phenomenon is often observed in online gaming or social media platforms, where an us versus them dynamic is pronounced. Understanding these dynamics offers insights into how digital platforms can be better designed to foster inclusivity rather than division. Let's take a look at some examples. The viral videos, labeled as Karen content, often feature conflicts that start from a challenge to that person's beliefs or their actions, whether it's being asked to wear a mask in a store during the height of COVID, or encountering a different cultural norm or activity in a public space. The reaction, often disproportionate, violent, and defensive, is a public display of these psychological processes. Recall the many incidents in which those dubbed a Karen challenged action or appearance that differs from their internal narrative, often causing harm to others by calling the police to enforce their internal biases, calling the police on a black birder in a public park, on black families having barbecues in public spaces, pointing guns at peaceful gatherings, calling police on children simply selling lemonade without a permit, harassing food service workers, and more. We've all seen these videos. Another example is the often contentious discourse around political topics on social media. When users encounter opposing views, the immediacy and anonymity of the platforms can lead to more extreme expressions of cognitive dissonance and defensive behavior than might occur in face-to-face interactions. Beyond the oft-cited viral incidents, real-world examples of cognitive dissonance and social identity threats manifest in various ways across different contexts. In the corporate world, for instance, executives and managers may experience intense discomfort when feedback from employee surveys reveals dissatisfaction or suggests that leadership practices are not as effective as believed. This can trigger a defensive response, where instead of addressing the issues, there's a dismissal or a rationalization of the feedback. This reaction not only hinders personal growth, but can perpetuate a corporate culture of denial that affects the overall organizational health. In the realm of public service, consider the response of communities when local government decisions, such as the removal of historical statues or the renaming of streets, are perceived as attacks on community identity. These situations can lead to public outcry, protests, and intense community conflict. Here, the defense of social identity tied to local history and heritage can override the opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue about the broader implications of old or outdated symbols and traditions. By understanding these reactions through the lens of social identity theory, policymakers can better strategize how to introduce changes in a manner that is sensitive to community identities and values, potentially easing transitions and reducing conflicts. Additionally, this Karen phenomenon we spoke about highlights the role of privilege in defensive reactions. Often, those featured in these viral Karen incidents belong to demographic groups historically directly endowed with or aligned with a demographic directly endowed with greater societal power. This power dynamic can exacerbate the defensiveness as it intersects with an ingrained sense of entitlement to certain treatments or standards of behavior. Recognizing this intersectionality is crucial in addressing the root causes of such incidents and in developing strategies to educate and mitigate such behaviors in a socially constructive way. Research by psychologists like Aaron Beck, who founded cognitive therapy, shows that our thoughts can distort our perceptions of reality, especially under stress. These cognitive distortions, like personalization, where people believe that everything others do or say is some kind of direct, personal reaction to them, can lead to the types of confrontations we see in these viral Karen incidents. Studies indicate that stress magnifies these effects by narrowing our cognitive focus and pushing us toward more primitive, defensive reactions. Under stress, people are more likely to revert to System 1 thinking, which includes these defensive and often irrational responses. Further research into defensive reactions explores the biological underpinnings of these responses. Neuroscientific studies have shown that when individuals feel their identity or beliefs are threatened, there's increased activity in the brain's amygdala, the region associated with emotional processing, particularly fear and threat detection. This biological response can lead to the activation of defensive behaviors before conscious thought has a chance to intervene. Understanding this can help explain why even well-intentioned critiques can sometimes elicit unexpectedly strong defensive reactions. Moreover, psychologist Jonathan Haidt's work on moral foundations theory provides additional insight into why certain topics provoke particularly vehement defenses. Haidt suggested that our moral reasoning is influenced by intuitive processes rather than rational thought, which aligns with Kahneman's System 1 thinking that we discussed in our last episode. When core moral values are challenged, values that are deeply intertwined with an individual's identity and worldview, this defensive response is not just about protecting beliefs, but defending one's moral foundation. This can intensify conflicts, especially in discussions involving polarizing topics such as politics, religion, or ethics. The role of stress in triggering defensive reactions cannot be overstated. In high-stress situations, the likelihood of reverting to defensive postures increases significantly. Research in psychoneuroimmunology has shown how stress affects cognitive functions, including decision-making and emotional regulation. Reducing stress through mindfulness practices such as meditation not only helps in mitigating defensive reactions, but also enhances overall cognitive resilience, enabling individuals to handle confrontations with greater composure. So what can be done? Awareness is the first step. Psychological strategies like meditation or other cognitive behavioral techniques could help individuals recognize their own biases and reduce defensive reactions. By understanding the roots of our discomfort, we can start to respond more thoughtfully when our ideas are challenged. Encouraging a culture of open dialogue and teaching emotional regulation skills can also help mitigate these defensive reactions. Creating environments, both online and offline, that promote understanding rather than judgment can facilitate healthier interactions as well. In practical terms, mitigating defensive reactions involves cultivating environments that prioritize empathy. For instance, in educational settings or workplaces, this might involve training programs that focus on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. These programs can teach individuals how to recognize their own defensive reactions and provide tools for de-escalating tensions before they lead to conflict. Techniques such as active listening, where participants are taught to listen to understand rather than to respond, can fundamentally change the dynamics of conversations, fostering a more open and less defensive atmosphere. Additionally, integrating meditation practices into daily routines can serve as a powerful antidote to automatic defensive responses. Meditation encourages an awareness of the present moment and a non-judgmental acceptance of one's thoughts and feelings. By regularly engaging in meditation exercises, individuals can develop the ability to pause and reflect before reacting, allowing them to respond from a place of calmness rather than defensiveness. This shift not only reduces personal stress, but also improves interpersonal relationships by reducing conflict and enhancing communication. Lastly, community-wide interventions can also play a significant role in mitigating defensive reactions. For instance, community dialogues that involve diverse groups in structured conversations can help reduce misunderstandings and preempt defensive standoffs. These interventions, facilitated by trained mediators, can foster a culture of open communication and respect across different community segments, effectively reducing the occurrence of defensive reactions on a larger scale. Today's exploration goes beyond the memes to touch on a deep aspect of human psychology. Understanding the mechanisms of defensive reactions and cognitive dissonance is crucial, especially as we consider the roles that identity factors like race and particularly whiteness play in these dynamics. Whiteness often carries with it unacknowledged privileges that can make acknowledging other perspectives challenging, heightening defensive responses when confronted with racial realities or accusations of racism. Yet by recognizing these intersections and the additional layers they bring to our interactions, we can start to dismantle the barriers to understanding and empathy. Maybe, just maybe, this awareness can make our social spaces a bit more understanding and a lot less confrontational. Through continued dialogue and education, we hold the hope of fostering a more inclusive society where all voices are heard and valued, and where learning from one another becomes the bridge to overcoming divides. Thank you for joining me for this episode of PsyberSpace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, and I look forward to our next deep dive into the mind and how it shapes and is shaped by the digital world. Until next time, stay curious and keep embracing the complexity of human behavior.